present her work. Dr. Mani, probably you are the one coming first. Kyazze, fortunately, you have been in the house for the previous presentations, so you know the rules of the game. You will present for up to 1 hour. It can't be less. And then thereafter, the rest of the processes will proceed. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, we welcome you to this session as the Dean has put it. But I want to thank the Dean also acting as the Chair and also Dean Graduate School, the external examiners and the panel of examiners. You're highly welcome to this session. I also thank Dr. Rubali, as you have been told, the co-supervisor. Our reason for being here is to receive findings from Madam Kyazze Deborah, who has been in the field doing some research on that very topic that is before you. So it is my pleasure and honor to invite Deborah to come and share with us the findings she got in relation to her topic. Deborah, you are welcome. But still,
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm so privileged to be here before you, and I'm willingly ready to share with you the findings on the study entitled Fathers' Parenting Practices to their children's psychosocial development from the age of 3 to 5 years in Kalangalo sub-county, Mityana district. I was ably introduced, and I would wish again to pronounce my name. I'm Deborah Rebecca Kyazze. Usually, they are good relations. Usually, they are good relations that are experienced in communities and are experienced in workplace. And such depicts the good psychosocial development. Sorry. Of signs of persons that I would wish to give an example where one can experience a better psychosocial person has is to see a family living harmoniously. And even those who have already undergone long-lasting marriages. It's quite interesting that even where you see couples very happy and collaborating and appreciating one another, then that means those are better signs of psychosocial development. However, we find that where they are reduced psychosocial adjustments, it will be an indicator through experiencing domestic violence, not listening to one another, even at most not wanting to sit where that other person is. And those that, and such would be like some adjusted and reduced psychosocial development. Psychosocial, in its sense, would refer to something to do with the social, the emotional connections, the development of the social, the spiritual, the cultural aspects in there. And we believe that psychosocial development, in its sense, is to do with the acquisition of the skills to do with how one can interact, how one can express her feelings, how one can appreciate, and how one can again appreciate that was created by God. And this is desired to be seen from of infancy up to the adulthood. I found out that when children are ably engaged in play, it gives a wider room to support this child to achieve the self-dependence, the self-esteem in him or her. And some studies have shown that they are, for instance, in Western part of the world, they have engaged more with their children, which is something good that will lead to support the psychosocial development. I noted that where both parents are in supporting the child's psychosocial development, it leads to everlasting impressions. But then, mother's influence on the child's psychosocial development doesn't bring it in much when she's alone. We find that at times mothers are subjected to harsh conditions. And at the end of the day, we also see that the father faces the negative consequences as regards to supporting this child, which will also lead to the poor attachment and bonding, especially in the early years. Studies in US are also revealing that for them, they spend more time with their children. And this now gives room to improve and to support the children's psychosocial development. And they have, of course, found it very, very, very good, very interesting. But then I said that the African fathers, for example, in South Africa, in Nigeria, they don't mind about that. They don't really see the need of being so much engaged with their children. And research can suggest lower adjusted psychosocial development. Over the years, in Uganda, 18 years back, in the north and northern region, there was the experience of the war conflicts, the civil wars, and so on. So programs came in as interventions to support the development of the psychosocial aspect. And then Mityana district, Kalangalo sub-county, in particular, where my study is, I found that there were a number of reports on crime cases that are reported. For instance, murder, even eviction, even domestic violence. And this may suggest poor psychosocial development. And this also may suggest poor attachment and bonding. Because if it was done, then why experience high crime cases there? So on this note, it justifies the major focus of fathers in this study. In an ideal situation where psychosocial development is well supported in engaging in a number of practices, the bonding, the mother, the father, the peers, and so on, are all around to support the attachment, which will lead us to have better psychosocial development. So in this way, the study, I noted that if the psychosocial development is well attended to, it will therefore lead to resultant efforts. In Mityana district, there are reported cases of, for example, malicious damage to property. For example, murder by mob. For example, the robbery, aggravated robbery. So again, this may suggest poor attachment and bonding, hence poor psychosocial development in the early years. Furthermore, the researches that have been conducted are having gaps. they are not talking about fathers' parenting practices and their children's psychosocial development at the age of 3 to 5 years. Therefore, the purpose of this study is to investigate the father's parenting practices and to their children's psychosocial development from 3 to 5 years in Kalangalo Sub-County, Mityana District. The objective of the study is to identify the father's parenting practices that promote their children's psychosocial development, to explore the influence of fathers' parenting practices to their children's emotional development at that age of 3 to 5 years, to analyze the contribution of fathers' parenting practices to their children's cultural development, and then to establish the influence of fathers' parenting practices to their children's psychosocial development from 3 to 5 years. My research question was, which fathers' parenting practices promote the children's psychosocial development? I had that question. And I furthermore also said, there is a statistically significant influence of fathers' practices to their children's psychosocial development. And there is statistically significant influence of fathers' parenting practices on their children's cultural development from 3 to 5 years. And there is statistically significant influence of fathers' parenting practices on their children's psychosocial development. This study was underpinned by an attachment theory by Mary Ainsworth. And it had its 3 major constructs. That is, secure, insecure, and unsafe or unstable. And how am I relating? How did I relate this theory to my study? First and foremost, the father is a significant figure in supporting the children's psychosocial development. And therefore, the father, being the figure, calls for strong attachment and bonding. And the father, through this attachment, is also establishing the security of this child. Mary Ainsworth's theory was on strange. She called it she called it strange. Yes, she called it strange. Strange situation. She called it strange situation. So attachment here, how I'm relating it is that it calls for parents being near this child. It calls for the parent child. So my being that it's looking at supporting the child children to have the psychosocial development, it applies appropriately. The conceptual framework. The conceptual framework is based on the title of the study, and the independent variable is father's parenting practices, and these are the practices in different aspects: the social, the emotional, the cultural, and spiritual, that have to give very positive outcomes. And without if the father doesn't do this, the outcomes will not be realized. And then the intervening variables are just slightly, because somewhere they also may contribute to the positiveness of the psychosocial development. What are the gaps in this case? For the first objective, fathers' parenting practices and their children's social development from 3 to 5 years, researchers, we are mainly focusing on children's social behavior, something to do with the fathers being behind bars, and therefore those children who belong to those fathers, we are seeing like not cooperating with those who have been exposed to their fathers. So the studies were around there, and there was nothing for fathers' parenting practices and children's social development. Objective 2, fathers' parenting practices and their children's emotional development from 3 to 5 years. The researchers conducted focused on parental behavior. And there was nothing on fathers' parenting practices specifically, and their children's psychosocial development. Objective 3, fathers' parenting practices and their children's cultural development. The researchers conducted focused on celebrating African men's role. They also focused on indigenous education in early childhood, and there was hardly nothing for fathers' parenting practices. And then fathers' parenting practices and their children's spiritual development from 3 to 5 years. The research studies conducted reflected parents influencing children's worship. They even go to church with them. It also was looking at the spiritual development among the children. But on fathers was missing. So the scope of the study took me to that period of time whereby a number of crime cases were cited by then, which may have suggested to poor psychosocial development. The theory was underpinned by attachment theory by Ernest Worth. The population was fathers and mothers of children aged 3 to 5. The limitation, parenting practices for children 3 to 5 years, and the data focuses on fathers' views. The methodology. The philosophical stand for this study was advocated by the post-positivist and the constructivist. It is the lens I used to do research. And the experiential sequential, the exploratory sequential mixed research guided me to carry out the collection of data. The collection of data was done among two groups, the mothers and the fathers. And of course, observing the two phases, the qualitative and the quantitative. So I kicked off from there to collect my data with the mothers using interviews. Then when I went through the process, I also now conducted, in my second phase, conducted my research using questionnaire, administering it to the fathers as my respondents. So the methodology here, furthermore, had fathers and mothers as the target population. It had a sample of fathers and mothers of children aged 3 to 5 years. The data collect methods were questionnaire method and interview method. The research instruments were key informant interview guide and questionnaire for fathers, which was also translated in the local language. The sample size, arriving at it, I used Morgan. School by school. The mothers. Why I went to the mothers? Because I believed they had the needed information. I wanted really to find out if what the fathers are really sharing is what they are doing. So it was through data saturation to arrive at 12 of them. The validity. The validity in my study observed the transferability, where I conducted a pilot testing, and the pilot testing was done in a different area, not the very area where I was going to collect my data. Then for consistency, dependability, I had to take back my results to them. Confirmability, I carried out a cross-checking from the respondents. For further quality control of my data, the validity was at 0.855, and I engaged research specialists, education specialists, and early childhood development specialists. The piloting, as I had earlier on said, was done in a similar area which has the same demographic characteristics. The Chronoback alpha coefficient for the reliability aspect was at 0.76, and this was got through administering a test. So the research question, which reads, which fathers' parenting practices promote the children's social development, I used the content analysis. And then for hypothesis 1, hypothesis 2, and hypothesis 3, I used the linear regression model. Why? Because I wanted to get the predictor. The ethical considerations. The approval and clearance from Kyambogo University was done. Guru Research Ethics Committee, Uganda National Council for Science and Technology, Mityana District Education Office. For confidentiality, I made sure I don't capture the names. And for the consent, I administered informed consent forms, which were both in English and local language version. For privacy, especially where I was conducting interviews with the mothers, I had to get a special place where I can interact with the mother. Presentation of findings, ladies and gentlemen. So the category of respondents were fathers and mothers, whose frequency was 375 and realized a 96.9%. The mothers were 12 and realized a 3.1%, in total, which gave a total frequency of 387, realizing 100%. Objective 1, fathers' parenting practices that contribute to their children's social development. So there were a category of them: conversation practices, practical skills, modeling, providing quality time, mentorship. And then the responses from fathers on the practices they do. So I further noted that these fathers, for sure, they allow socialization. So I have some experts that I want to share with you. I have it in the Uganda version and the English version. I shall read only one because of time. This one goes, omwami wange ayagala nnyo okuyita abaana be amannya g'ekika. My husband likes calling his children by clan name. I just picked some samples. Whereas the fathers feel they are carrying out psychosocial support, they have to do some more practices. For example, omwami wange talowooza nti kikulu nnyo omwana okumanya ebyobuwangwa by'abalala, era tasobola kulaba nsonga yakubawa bitabo ebikwata ku mawanga amalala. My husband does not think that it is important for his child to learn about cultures of different people. And he cannot even provide books for that. So there was at least an effort observed, which I learned that the fathers are trying at least to socialize, much as there is still a gap to fill. Objective 2, contribution of fathers' parenting practices towards children's emotional development. I used scatter plot. After collecting my data, I had to use the scatter plot. This is a positive linear. The results were positive. Some of the practices are done, but still there's some more to add. In this hypothesis, there was a positive linear relationship between fathers' parenting practices and children's emotional development, which was at 0.0, which was at 0.615. And the coefficient of determination was 0.378. Therefore, 37.8% of the variation in children's emotional development, which was explained by the father's parenting practices. So, the contribution of fathers' parenting practices was cited in the children's emotional development and was found it's supporting the psychosocial development at 37.8%. And now, the remaining 62.2% was contributed by peers, by mothers, even at most the environment where the child is staying. Objective 3. In reference to the scatter plot, the scatter plot was for parenting practices and children's cultural development. And by the way, by using the scatter plot, I was trying to look at if it has the father's parenting practices and the children's psychosocial development have an impact. Is there an impact in what is being done? I was looking at the two variables in this instance. Then under the coefficient table, it was realized it was at 0.618 positive linear relationship between fathers' parenting practices and children's cultural development. And in summary here, the coefficient of determination was 0.382. Therefore, 38.2% of the variation in children's emotional development data was explained by the father's parenting practices. And now, the contribution of fathers' parenting practices as cited in the children's cultural development was at 38.2%, and the remaining 61.8% was contributed by other factors, which included the mothers, the fathers, the peers, and so on. Then my objective 4. The scatter plot was also positive linear, and it was showing the contribution between fathers' parenting practices and the spiritual development. So there was a positive linear relationship between fathers' parenting practices and children's spiritual development at 0.68, giving a significance of 0.0000. So the coefficient of determination was 0.463. Therefore, 46.3% of the variation in children's spiritual development data was explained by the father's parenting practices. So here, in this very objective, the contribution of fathers' parenting practices, as cited in the children's spiritual development, found its supporting children's psychosocial development at 46.2%. So the remaining 53.8% was contributed by other factors. discussion of findings. So this study found that fathers' parenting practices are actually doing a lot in supporting the children's social development. And in countries, you find that this is done at a higher percentage. And in Kalangalo, per se, they have not yet so much realized reaching that support of the children's social development. In objective 2, the study found that the contribution of fathers' parenting practices, the fathers are actually doing a lot. And out of what we have already seen in the tables, it is realized at 37.8% linear. And some of the authors, of course, agree that fathers have an important role to play. In objective 3, the study learned that fathers were supporting their children. And that was at 38.2% positive linear. And in doing this, for example, they take their children to participate in the cultural events. They talk to them about the roles of family members and the like. Then objective 4, the study found out that fathers contribute to the children's spiritual development at 46.3%. For example, they talk about God with their children. That is one of them. So in conclusion, for objective 1, it was established that the fathers promote the children's social development at a degree or at a certain level, but there's still more desired to be done. Objective 2, to explore the influence of the fathers' parenting practices to their children's emotional development from 3 to 5 years. There was evidence that fathers contribute to their children's emotional development, which was at 37.8%, remaining 62.2%, which has to be bridged. Objective 3, to analyze the contribution of fathers' parenting practices to their children's cultural development from 3 to 5 years. The study established that factors that contribute to the children's cultural development was at 38.2%, remaining 1.2%, whose gap has to be filled. Then objective 4, to establish the influence of fathers' parenting practices to their children's spiritual development from 3 to 5 years. It is now clear that fathers contribute to the children's spiritual development, of course, having a gap of 53.3% that requires bridging. So the contribution to the knowledge, to the word of knowledge. Ladies and gentlemen, this study has found that has found out that the parenting practices that the fathers engage in promoting the children's psychosocial development are contrary to the idea where they are saying that the fathers are absent. So at least there are practices which can be labored on. And the study further identified specific practices that can increase the children's psychosocial development. And also, there are those that can reduce the psychosocial development. So the study highlighted practices that are suggested in the Western world, and for us here, especially in Kalangalo sub-county, some of them cannot apply. For example, something to do with the sleeping with the child in the same bed. When we go culturally, when the child has reached an age, has got to go to her own bed or his own bed. So the study noted that there is need to identify more practices which are applicable to the setting. So the recommendations, this study found out that fathers are actually doing a lot to support the children's emotional development. So the study recommended that let the community development officers try to train these young fathers in how they can support their children socially, to develop socially, to sensitize them, and so on. And therefore, the study further also let National Curriculum Development Center develop some parenting packages that can be used to guide the service providers on how they can guide the fathers in this aspect of the psychosocial development. The further other recommendation, as per the objective 3, fathers' parenting practices and children's cultural development, is to bring on board Ministry of Gender to support the communities, to support the families, because somewhere Ministry of Gender, it falls in that docket of how they can support the parents. The study further found out that fathers' parenting practices and their children's spiritual development was that fathers talk to their children about God and so on. So it was recommended that fathers need to follow the spiritual practices like meditating, for example, because it helps the child in her everyday life. So the study sampled, used some of these references to back up the study, and I further went to do some publications in the very area, and I would wish to take this opportunity to extend my sincere gratitude to the dear supervisors who are with me in this study, head of department, early childhood development, today we are calling it early childhood care and education, the coordinator, PhD program, the office of the dean, graduate school, the PhD examination committee, my colleagues at large, the audience, those here and online. I want to extend my sincere gratitude to you for giving me this opportunity to share with you my findings on the topic, fathers' parenting practices and their children's psychosocial development from the age of 3 to 5 years in Kalangalo Sub-County, Mityana District. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Deborah, for taking us through your research, giving us the highlights of what you did. We want to thank you. You may want to push this chair to the table so that you have support for your books.
Push it. I go near.
Okay, as you organize yourself, we will have now to begin our session with examiners. If you were in court, we would call this session cross-examination. But for now, we shall ask the examiners to interact with you, because academics is not a court of law. You're not in a court of law, but we want to be sure that, Deborah, this is your work, and you, most importantly, that you understand what you did. Okay, so we'll give the first go to the external examiner. This viva is set for 3 hours, and we shall interact within these 3 hours. Kyazze has taken about 45 minutes, and so we'll expect that the rest of the minutes will be taken up by the examiners and the members of the public, and probably online if they have any. We shall get to them as well. So the external examiner, Dr. Modest Odama, this is your time to interact with the candidate. I hope you have a microphone, please. Can you get one to him? Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning, Doctor.
It's so exciting to be here in this wonderful place with my colleagues. Many of you have seen in many places, and we have interacted with some of you. I know one of you defended his thesis when I was in the audience, even asking some questions to him. And he's among us here. That's very good to interact again after some time. And I'm also very excited to be invited by Kyambogo University, particularly the Faculty of Education. This is an honor that I'll never forget. And then more so, I would like to thank the Dean of the Graduate School for the wonderful interaction we have been having over this wonderful day that has come today. Thank you so much. And I want to also thank the Dean of the Faculty of Education for the warm welcome and for being a good friend we have interacted with some time. And I want also to thank Deborah for bringing us together today. Without you, I wouldn't expect myself to be here. And furthermore, I would like to thank Professor Eju, my colleague with whom we work a lot. And he has mentored me. Probably I've also inspired him in some way. And that is the crossroads we had together. And my colleagues, the internal examiners here present, I thank you so much. And may God bless this process and may it be a success. For our media team, the ICT department, thank you for coordinating this. Back to Deborah. Deborah, you have brought us into this conversation. I call it a conversation. I want to make it simpler for you because the moment I talk of examination, your heart can jump out of you. And I wouldn't like you to feel that way. It is a conversation about the research that you did. And I'm grateful to be a part of this conversation. Let me begin by asking some questions to facilitate this conversation. And I really pray that you honestly respond to these questions. One of the questions, but before I go there, let me first agree with you. Are you comfortable taking a question and responding to it immediately, or you will respond after all the questions I have asked? We need to agree here.
Thank you, Doctor. I would request we go question by question so that I respond ably.
Okay.
And it will give me room also to be seeking more guidance and taking note of it.
Okay, thank you. I think that is, I agree with you on that one. You deserve some control in this matter. Okay, the first question is, what is your view of a child? Or who is a child, according to Deborah, in this study you have presented to us?
Okay. Thank you very much, Doctor. In this study, first of all, the type of child I'm talking about is the child who is aged 3 to 5 years. And this is a child who is still developing the brain, whose brain connections desire to have the early learning and stimulation.
Thank you for that. What about a man or a lady who is 50 years old and still behaves like a child of 3 to 5 years?
Thank you, Doctor. So about the man who is at that age, in most instances, who is still behaving in that way, may have not been supported at the infant stage. He may have lost his skills were not tapped. The early stimulation, he was not supported. He was not well stimulated, that he reached the bar of the desired holistic development.
Okay, to the next question. What message, some people call this your thesis or argument, you can name it. That's how many researchers are baptizing it. But for me, I want to be a very simple man from Kalangalo, that sub-county. So now, what message are you communicating to us, your readers, your audience, about this research, particularly focusing on fathers' parenting practices in relation to the children's psychosocial development?
Thank you very much, Doctor. What I'm trying to communicate is that, first of all, fathers are standard figures that contribute to their child's psychosocial development. So in this case, the father yields and contributes a lot to the child's development. The father is looked at as a figure that promotes and ably supports to see that this child achieves all the desired competencies. So the message here is that the fathers should endeavor to more and more in supporting the children, because at the end of the day, they will not experience any mishaps, any kind of like poor relationship. So once they are there and are fully felt, then that will give a world of difference.
Okay, turning to your conceptual framework, hoping you will lead us there. You could project it for us. I know it is a long way to reach there, but you will. Okay. To what extent did this conceptual framework influence your generation or statement of the specific research objectives?
I beg your pardon?
To what extent did this conceptual framework you have come up with, and I noticed it is your own creation. Now, how did it influence your statement of the specific research objectives?
Thank you very much, Doctor. It influenced my study by looking at what have the fathers contributed in supporting the children's psychosocial development. How have they supported them socially?
Sorry, I mean, you have these big blocks created here. One is for the independent variable, and it has different aspects you have included there. On the other side, I see the dependent variable, and then down this way, there is the intervening variable. My specific focus is on the first two, the independent and the dependent variable. You have specific objectives that you have outlined. But I was wondering how these influenced those 4 specific research objectives you have there. What is the connection between these and the specific objectives? That is the question.
Okay, thank you very much. The connection is that with my objectives is that here it is elaborating the depth of those different aspects, and these are the limits that
you could also go to those specific research objectives and let the audience see what you are discussing, because we are now interacting with you, but we have the audience here that is also looking, and my fellow colleague examiners also looking at that. Could you
I scroll?
Yes, to the specific research objectives. The first one?
The first one is to identify fathers' parenting practices that promote their children's social development from 3 to 5 years, to explore the influence of fathers' parenting practices to their children's emotional development from 3 to 5 years, to analyze the contribution of fathers' parenting practices to their children's cultural development from 3 to 5 years, then to establish the influence of the fathers' parenting practices to their children's spiritual development from 3 to 5 years.
Yes, go back to 1. I would like to draw your attention to that one in particular. To identify fathers' parenting practices.
Yes.
My wonder is, why do you have to do that when it is already there?
Thank you very much, Doctor. Why I had to do that, I was exploring to make sure that I wanted to find out, much as they are there in the conceptual framework, but are they promoting the practices to support the child's psychosocial development? And if they are promoting, which are these practices that they are promoting to support the child's child's social development at the age of 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, my concern is you have already identified these in your conceptual framework. They're already there. And here you are again going back to identify. So that's where my problem is. Otherwise, to me, it would look like the first objective wouldn't be that.
Okay.
It would be something related to fathers' social practices that can influence children's social development. So what are they? You have already identified them. But your job wouldn't be going back to identify. You have already done it. Now, why should you go back? That study, the first objective, actually, the study is done. That's my initial comment on that. But the way you're explaining it, it seems it is not yet done. Now, what is the objective you wanted to put there? That's one. And then two is you have the hypothesis. You can switch to that. Hypothesis 1, 2 to 3. So which hypothesis did you go to test? Is it the null hypothesis?
Sorry?
Which hypothesis did you go to test? Or did you test when you went to Kalangalo and you were doing the study, collecting data, and that would bring the evidence that you would use to test your hypothesis? Now, which hypothesis did you test?
I tested the first one is there is statistically significant influence of the father's parenting practices on their children's emotional development from 3 to 5 years. And then I also tested hypothesis 2.
Okay, that's okay. But now the challenge here is, did you test what statisticians call the null hypothesis, or you tested the alternative or research hypothesis?
I tested the alternative.
What happened to the null?
I didn't test.
Probably for me, you would have tested the null hypothesis. That's how I think a lot of statisticians would look at that. The null hypothesis needs testing. And then it will lead into either confirming, rejecting, and so forth. That's how I think it should go. Let's move further. Theory.
Doctor,
yes,
thank you
please.
very much for that observation. I will share with my supervisors to see how we can improve.
Okay, that's fine. Theory of attachment. I like that theory. It reminds me of my son at the hospital when the boy was delivered. What happened was, within just 3 to 10 minutes, he opened his eyes, looked at me, and I was, what is happening here? This little one has already an attachment with me at this early stage. What may happen in 10 years? It really shocked me, and up to today, the attachment continues. So in a way, your study was touching me when I was reading it. Now, this theory of attachment looks a very important theory, but there are some questions about it which you need to clarify for us. One of them is, who advanced the theory? You had answered that already. That is Mary who? Anisworth. That name is really disturbing you. In the write-up here, I'm seeing Anisworth. So who is who? Which is which? Okay. You need to make a clarification on that and set it right.
Yes, I'm sorry, doctor, for that observation, but...
And then there is also a challenge here that Anisworth, and then there is Kindra 2018 you are citing here. So who owns this theory really? Or who is the origin or the original author of this theory?
Thank you very much, doctor. The origin of that theory is John Bowerby, and the one I concentrated on was the one who followed to contribute to that theory. But the one who started it was John Bowell-By.
Yeah, I think it would be in order if you brought John, other than Ainsworth. Those are now people who commented, discussed this theory after the first author. I think it would be in order to strengthen your thesis, to put that original author of that theory of attachment.
Thank you, Doctor.
And more so, when it comes to your reference list, Ainsworth doesn't feature anywhere. What happened?
I'm sorry, Doctor. I shall incorporate that author there for that attachment theory.
Okay. And what is the academic and practical value of this theory in your thesis?
Thank you very much, Doctor. The academic value for this attachment theory focuses or relies on the early learning and stimulation, the responsiveness. Because if there is that responsiveness that is extended by the carer, it will support the brain connection and therefore call for the holistic development of this child. And at the same time, it will call for, once there is that strong attachment and bonding, then it will call for promotion of good life skills and values. For example, the self-dependence, the self-esteem would be some of the skills that would have been tapped, and therefore the child will be fitting into the society and in the academic world.
Okay. Literature review. Let me go step by step here. Literature review, you have done a tremendous collection of, according to so and so and so said this. But where is Deborah Kyazze in this literature review? Is there any evidence you could point to when you look at your literature review that this is Deborah? This is Deborah's voice. Are there some indications?
Yeah, there are. Thank you very much, Doctor. There are some indications in terms of commenting on what the findings, what the findings of those studies revealed, and then the researcher, I, come in to give comment on them.
Deborah, you have your book in front of you. Can you refer to, yes, those sections so that we are sure that your voice is captured there?
Thank you.
You can feel free to point to any section to illustrate that.
But I shall beg to get more clarification on I'm understanding it from might call it happening. I don't know whether I'm understanding it the way.
You're right. You're right.
Okay. On page 34. Page 34. There is an author quoted that reads Carlson. It's like a it's a paragraph, like a paragraph before we move to the last paragraph, which reads, these findings suggest that it is not simply the presence of a father figure that impacts child outcomes, but perhaps other fathering factors, such as father involvement, that mediate the relationship between father absence and child social development outcomes.
Excellent. That's what I'm looking for. Deborah should be throughout this literature review, not just in one paragraph.
Okay.
That's the idea behind it. You're interacting with the authors meaningfully. That's very important.
Thank you very much. I shall enrich the voice.
Chapter 3. How did you use Kyazze and Morgan in determining the two categories of your sample? That is the fathers and then the mothers.
Thank you very much, Doctor. For sampling for the fathers, I used Morgan, and I went population by population per school. And then for the mothers, it was data circulation because I wanted.
Let me redirect that. Morgan, Kyazze and Morgan,
Yes.
you used these two authors. But what did you identify from these two authors that you applied in your study? Directly, what did you get from them?
I got the sample size. I looked at the population, and then the population.
Was it a whole book or what was it?
Pardon?
Was it a book or an article? What was it?
Doctor, thank you very much. It was a chart. It is displayed with already displayed having a range indicate
Yes.
and size.
Very good. Now that you are pointed to that Kyazze and Morgan table you used, you call it a chart. I would call it a table. That's okay. Now, that table gave you the size. Let me wait for that, since there's a bit of interruption here on your side. So the table gave you the sample sizes that correspond with the population size.
The population size per school.
Okay. Now, when you reached Kalangalo there, how did you implement that? That is the question.
Okay.
You selected how many fathers?
I did what I would call the simple random sampling.
How did you do that? That is the heart of the question. In practice, how did you do it in Kalangalo? In those schools, you selected parents using simple random. How did you do it?
Okay, I would look for the parents who have children aged 3 to 5 years in the centers which are attached to the primary schools. And because that was actually my limit, I wouldn't go beyond a parent who has parents who have children who are above that age in the school, in the center, in the ECD center, in the primary school.
And how did you get those people or the respondents you have there? Like in one school, you selected so many. That process is missing. It's not forthcoming.
Okay, much as it was simple, because it was simple random sampling, I wouldn't like to call it purposive, but I want to call it simple, because I was strictly looking at those parents who specifically have children who are 3 to 5, and I would select them through the simple way, not pointing at them.
Okay. So you need to go through that very carefully and re-examine that part. Because it is a very important selection process you did. And we need the clarity, the details to come out. And then who did you select purposively?
Thank you very much, Doctor. I purposely selected the mothers, but because my approach was data saturation, so I was looking for mothers who will give me the information that talks about the father's parenting practices, if they are being extended.
So why did you select the mothers?
Thank you very much, Doctor. I selected them because I actually wanted to get it from the horse's mouth if it's really true that the fathers are exercising the parenting practices as per those aspects.
Were you a CID officer or you were a researcher?
I was a researcher, and I wanted to learn and understand it better and get it well and get the truth from it.
Okay, that's fine. Could I lead you into the next chapter 4? Chapter 4, you presented the findings of your study and you try to organize it based on your specific research objectives, and then you connected that to the hypothesis, which is okay. But there are quite a number of issues here you need to clarify for us. In relation to the father's emotional practices, my worry is you hardly name the emotion that the fathers need to develop in the child. What happened? Why did you keep so silent about that? What are those emotions? Specifically, name them. Anger, let us say. And I don't see it in your work. Why do you hide in the sky and not come down to Kalangalo and name those emotions the way they should be?
Thank you very much, Doctor. I shall enrich that part and not be silent, so that the fathers are not cheated from not exercising the practice.
And that would enrich your work so much, I guess.
Yes. Thank you very much for the guidance.
The next challenge, I know some of my colleagues will come in and they will also pursue some of these ideas. You claim to have tested hypotheses. You really claim that you tested them. How did you test the hypothesis? Which hypothesis did you test? I'm not seeing the null hypothesis being tested. That's one thing. And then how you tested the null hypothesis is not very clear at the moment. So my wonder is, how did you test this hypothesis you claim to have tested? And then the most important bit of it is, what decision did you make after testing the hypothesis? And why did you make those decisions? Those are the questions that surround almost all the three hypotheses you claim to have tested. Now, which hypothesis? I was suspecting you were going to test the null hypothesis, but I don't see it. Then, how did you test the hypothesis? I see you using the correlation, especially the scatter plot is there. I can see the regression model, the beta values, I can see them there. But where are the Pearson correlation coefficients in this study? Where are they lumped, put together maybe somewhere? You could have followed them and brought them together clearly so that we see the steps you took in testing the hypothesis. So would you make some comments on this?
Thank you very much, Doctor, for that question. First and foremost, when I was analyzing my data, I felt that what would rightly be appropriate is to use the linear regression model for purposes of determining the predictor. And I was not finding it ably if I use the Spearman, or rather the Pearson, because with the Pearson, or rather with the Spearman, I was not looking for purposes of ranking. No, I just wanted to see which are the predictors in this matter. Now, as regards to your guidance that you don't see the null and you would see the null, I will have to liaise with my supervisors and we ably address.
That will be good, because you need to state the type of statistic you are going to use in the data analysis. Even in your chapter 3, it should have come out. I'm going to use this particular statistic or this group of statistics to analyze this data, that data, that data. I think you need to use those details and make sure they are reflected in your chapter 3, and you carry them to your chapter 4, data analysis. I think that's a very important observation we need to look at. And then in the discussion of your findings, there are quite a number of things I would like you to pay attention to. You have made some generalizations about father social parenting, which is so interesting on page 100. That generalization is very risky. Page 100. Do you see the paragraph that is in the middle there, stating that it was revealed that fathers did not provide for their children's needs? Who are these fathers you're talking about? All the fathers in the world? You see how generalized, how risky that generalization is in your thesis. And it has no empirical evidence to prove it. Your study didn't prove that. What is your take on that? What is your view on that?
Thank you very much, Doctor. I shall enrich and qualify the fathers I meant here, so that it doesn't appear like, and I shall provide also that source.
And almost coming to the last, real life emotions, real life cultural practices that you want the fathers to concentrate on. But when it comes to the cultural practices, you have a 3-year-old to 5-year-old child. What does taking this child to a funeral, what does it mean to this kid? Is this child able to understand what is going on in a funeral setting, in a okwanjula or a wedding? These are cultural things. But you focused on language, you focused on, I think, something else too, but not so much emphasized here. But my worry is the ability of this child, who is between 3 and 5 years. Is this child able to understand the complexities involved in these cultural practices that the men or the fathers need to?
Thank you very much, Doctor. Like I had earlier on mentioned, that psychosocial development requires to be tapped right from infant, and not when the child has already grown up. And today, when I look at, for example, some of the cultural practices, like you've said, today we are even I'm even seeing children of 3 years participating in the introduction function through dancing. They entertain the guests. They also go to greet them, and they are also they are also told that we want you to grow up, first conduct your studies, complete them, and then at the end be like your sister. So I look at it in the perspective that it has no harm if this child is exposed early in understanding the cultural values. Take another example. I take another example where the child has lost a parent. So in Kalangalo sub-county, the practice is, leave alone the funeral services that have come in today, that is the Western culture practice, that you don't touch the body. Once it is handled by a funeral service, it is just taken straight to the cemetery. But here the cultural practice in Kalangalo sub-county stands that this child of 3 years has got to practice the last rites, like washing the face. So the child has to bid farewell to the parent. And once it's not done, it will cause doubt in the family that maybe this father is not, this girl is not a daughter to this father. It seems that the mother got this child from another man. So once the mother refuses the child to touch or to do the practice, it will be an indicator. So I, for one, it actually has no harm if this child is started on at the earlier stage, so long as it is clearly explained to her and she ably understands it.
That's a good response, but now you need to tag it, connect it to the children's abilities. And I know you are busy developing curricula for children in the early levels like that. But the curriculum should be connected to the different abilities and the ages of these children, isn't it? And these are some of the practical things I was looking for in your discussion. And you need to enrich that part using that.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you so much, Kyazze. Yes. I wish you a good day.
Thank you, Doctor.
Okay, thank you very, very much, Dr. Odama, for taking us through that session. Sorry. Yeah, when external examiners are asking questions, I know many things go on in our minds. Today, in this one, I saw an expert tailor. When you're cutting clothes by an expert tailor, you cut different pieces differently, but measured correctly, so that when you come to fit them together, they must fit this person correctly without, either squeezing the chest or, being too tight. Okay, so that was what we were going through. Different pieces of this thesis were designed, but finally they must fit together neatly to be able to fit that size. Thank you very, very much, Dr. Odama, for that. We'll go to Dr. George Wilson Kasule to identify those critical areas which have not yet been addressed by the external examiner, because we have about 30, I think about 45 minutes now. Thank you, George.
Thank you, Dean and Chair, for this session. And thank you, Dr. Dama, for engaging the candidate. I appreciate what you have raised, and actually some of the remarks I have here have already been touched on. I congratulate you, Deborah, and your supervisors for reaching this far on your PhD trajectory. It has not been easy, but you are there, and you're almost to jump over the hurdle. I read your work with a lot of enthusiasm, as I consider it an opportunity for me to learn more about how I can be a better father, so that I can enhance my children's psychosocial development. But now my question is, if you can reflect on your title, Fathers' Parenting Practices and Their Children's Psychosocial Development from 3 through 5 years, Kalangal Sub-County. Now, is this study of yours, did it involve all the fathers in Kalangal Sub-County? You can respond.
Okay. Thank you very much, Doctor. This study didn't involve every father. It was involving the fathers who have children in the nursery school attached to the government school, aged 3 to 5 years.
All right. So in that light, is it prudent for you to kind of reflect on your title so that it really brings out that? Because the first impression I got is, oh, fathers parenting. So it is inclusive of all fathers. So probably you need to think about that.
Thank you.
And then that takes me to another question. What did your study set out to solve, to address? What problem is your study addressing?
Thank you very much, Doctor. The problem the study is addressing is on the low, the poor bonding and attachment, the low psychosocial aspects, and these require to be supported to
All
bridge
right.
the gap.
So the poor or low psychosocial development of children in Kalangal sub-county, not so?
Yes, sir.
Does your problem statement bring out this? Does the problem statement bring out the status quo of the social, the psychosocial development of children? because it's like you are presenting more of the parenting practices other than bring out the status quo. If you want to solve that, you need to have insight about that. And secondly, you need to provide insights also on possible factors that really can contribute to that status quo. And then you give a justification why are you zeroing down on the father's parenting. Do you agree?
Yes, Doctor, I shall improve on it.
All right. Now, when it comes to why did you choose 3 to 5? Why not 1 to 3?
Thank you very much, Doctor. Why I settled on the age of 3 to 5 years, because this is now the level at which there is rapid changes realized, and a lot of tapping is required for this child to achieve the whole holistic development.
Don't children from 1 to 3 need that?
They need it, but for this study, I basically wanted the 3 to 5, whom I can even, of whom I know that the fathers have already taken them to school, and they are required to start learning other skills.
We are interested in other skills, or you are interested in how the fathers contribute to the psychosocial development, and when does that start?
Of course, the psychosocial development would start from birth, but for this one specifically, my interest was at 3 to 5, and the father.
Now, the question I'm asking: why did you neglect now the 1 to 3?
It would be a big study for me. I wouldn't handle that. I preferred the 3 to 5 because in the area of developing the early learning and stimulation, I rightly wanted to see how are the fathers supporting these children psychosocially.
Oh yeah, all right. I appreciate your remark, but now in academia we want to come up with ideas that solve a problem. Now, it would not be prudent to neglect the first things first, and then we go to another level. Probably you need to think about that. Then, secondly, in your conceptual framework, are the fathers you investigated, are they heterogeneous or homogeneous? The fathers that you involved, including the mothers, but mainly let us look at the fathers. Are they heterogeneous or homogeneous, the samples? Okay. Can I make it more simpler? Okay. Now, all right. In your conceptual framework, there is where you said the practice, reading books for the children, those kind of things. You remember?
Yes.
Now, my question is, were all these fathers able really to read? They weren't there illiterate fathers? Because that is now, if the population was a heterogeneity in nature, it means that different fathers really have different abilities, have different, So for you to assume that everybody reads a story to the child, then do you get that point?
Yes.
Then another thing, we have functional homes and dysfunctional homes. Still on the issue of homogeneity and heterogeneity. Were all these homes, all the fathers investigated, were they functional fathers or some were dysfunctional fathers? And what are the results from the functional fathers vis-a-vis results from the dysfunctional fathers? Probably you may wish to respond on that.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Now, as regards to the fathers, I would like to refer to the Mityana district profile, which reveals that the literacy levels in that area are at 76.6% able to read and write. So these fathers, I got them at school through the permission of the district education office in liaison with the head teacher of the school. And these are the fathers who are also minding and caring about taking their children to school.
You said 76 point something. 76.
76.
Now, what happens to the 24?
Now, those 24 were not there because I was looking at.
But the people you involved in the study, you mean all of them were able to read and write?
They were able to read and write. They were able to read and write, the fathers. I made sure that the fathers I really engage in the study are able to read and write, and these were the ones who are taking their children to school.
Now, did you purposely select these fathers that are able to read and write, or it was a random sampling for these fathers' population?
It was not purposive. It was simple.
Simple random, whatever.
But my limitation was it should be a father who has a child of 3 to 5 years and is accessed from school.
Accessed from school?
And is found at school.
The fathers were...
They bring their children to school. They bring their children to school. So I was getting the fathers through the permission of the head teacher.
But these are village schools, I would imagine. The Kalangalo, are they urban?
They are village.
And I think it's a bit weird for village schools for parents to bring their children. In most cases, children take themselves there.
I think I meant fathers who enroll their children in school.
Okay, but I think with your supervisors, we'll think more about the sample, looking into the homogeneity and heterogeneity issues, so that you increase the credibility of your study. All right?
Thank you very much.
And you say that your study mainly is to solve the low psychosocial development of children in Mityana.
Yes,
all right? So which means that we need that really to come out more in the statement of the problem. Then another thing that will also, it has implication on the methodology and the data analysis. For example, did you present any results regarding the psychosocial development of the children in Mityana?
Yes, I used the SPSS. I used the descriptive statistical data, though I didn't flash it there. And
so children in Kalangalo sub-county, do they have high psychosocial development, or they have low?
It was positive.
What do you mean by positive?
I don't want to say high because out of my findings.
And okay, you will reflect on that question. Did you have dimensions of the socio-economic, the psychosocial development of these children, the psychosocial development dimensions? For example, how did you rate the rating of these psychosocial development dimension of the children, probably prior to the study, and then the views of the parents and the mothers, and your analysis after the study? I think that needed to really come out well. What's the status quo of the psychosocial development for the children? And then the dimensions of the social psycho development, and now what comes out of the results, that if now fathers do this, then children's culture or spiritual or something really is high. I think that is missing in your study, and yet it's very important. Actually, that one, brings me to something else that you need to think about. It's like, what do fathers need to do in order to promote children's psychosocial development? What do fathers need to do? You need to have this categorized, that we have this category, and this category. So that if at all there is the problem and you went out to solve it, so you need to have that kind of, categorization or profile that this is what needs to be done. Actually, I find your either recommendation or whatever on page 28 on your presentation here, that the study noted they need to come up with more activities that are applicable to African culture. I thought your study was meant to do this. I thought your study was meant to come up with the activities that promote psychosocial development. Do you agree?
Yes, Doctor.
So, which means that really you need to visit your book and then really come up with the categorization of what really fathers need to do, and then the dimensions on which exactly the children are going to be measured. And even your dissertation should present results showing that if fathers really do this, it can lead to this. And then another question, you talk of improving children's religious kind of development or spiritual development. One of your objectives and in the conceptualization. Do you agree?
I beg your pardon.
Your work, one objective was enhancing spiritual development of the children. For example, there is this objective. All right. Hypothesis 3, maybe we can look. There is statistically significant influence on the father's parenting practices on their children's spiritual development from 3 to 5 years. All right? Now, were there any atheistic fathers in your study? No? Did you investigate the spiritual belonging of the fathers? Did you find out the religious affiliation of the fathers?
I didn't, because I was looking at
So you just assumed that every father is religious?
not assuming as such.
Do you have evidence that they were religious? If you don't have evidence that they were religious, so you just assumed. Is there a possibility that among the people you interviewed, there were some atheists, or a question you administered to atheist fathers? And then, does that objective really hold water? Think about it. And then you mentioned that these students are developing, okay, the learners, the children are developing this. And did you look into the current trend where now we have contradiction between cultural values and religious affiliations, religious groups? There are some cultural practices you mentioned here, but some religious sects don't believe in them. Now, what are you saying? How did you synchronize the two? Or how would you as a curriculum developer, how do you synchronize that view? I'd like to hear your comment on that.
Thank you, Doctor. I would approach that question in the perspective of looking at the practices, because my focus was mainly on practices. And the limit here, to me, I wanted to see what is that the fathers are doing as regards to...
Yeah, but you have the cultural development, you have the cultural practices, and these should be contextualized, which means actually different religious groups may have appreciate different cultural values.
Yes.
So that's what I'm asking, that how do you synchronize those aspects so that you come up really with really what works? Probably you need to revisit and zero down on a particular, kind of target group where something can be applicable across. Do you think so?
In that particular setting for Kalangala. Because my limit was Kalangalo, but again, if I make recommendations, it means that some of these recommendations can be workable. However, I take note of that observation.
Okay. Then the last question, observation, is you indicate that the head teacher, Kalangalo Head Teacher Association, is the one that provided or acted as a source for the fathers. Is it true?
For the preparation of the fathers, yes.
It acted as a source to inform you in picking the fathers?
No, they were giving me the population of the fathers they have in school for those children.
Are these nursery schools under that?
Yes, they are under that association because the nursery schools are attached to the government school as per the policy that was put in place.
Okay.
That let the ECD centers be attached to the primary
So,
school.
in one sentence, what would you have done differently for you to solve the problem you pointed out in light of my conversation with you?
What I would have done differently is would be through sharing the findings with the very catchment area, and then come up with some write-ups that would guide on providing the skills to the family.
All right, okay. Chair, I rest my case.
Thank you very much, George, for taking us through that session. George raises very, very critical issues. Where do you start climbing that tree from? That's what I picked from his first question. Do you start from the top or do you start from the bottom? Very, very important, Deborah, for you to reflect on. The problem, every year, the police issues statements on the crime rates in the country. Every year, they give the different categories of crime and the prevalence of that crime in different districts. So the question is, what was the problem in Mityana that Kalango as regards our context? You check that out later. But his last question is also very critical. Remember, I said I double as an internal examiner. So his last question is very, very critical. What would you have done differently, Kyazze? You need to reflect on that. I kindly request that sanitizer to be the microphone to be sanitized. And I request Dr. Wilson Mujizi to take us through next. Please exercise your, I don't want to say that, but just feel that it's now adequate. That's
Okay.
what I mean.
Okay, thank you, Dean. And thank you, Kyazze, for the presentation. I will start on a light note. I think when you are writing your names, follow the APA. We start with the first name, and then the other names come after. I hope you understand what is the first name.
I request to be guided.
I would assume the religious, because we're using APA, the American style, the Christian names or religious names come first, then the surnames come last.
Thank you, Doctor.
One thing which makes me perplexed in this work, your topic proposes one dependent variable, but the objectives have several dependent variables. And that creates analysis problem. You have what we call one-to-many. But when you look at your conceptual framework, it has one DV, yet the objectives suggest several DVs. So it creates a challenge that as the opponent, the external examiner was saying, you did not derive the objectives from your conceptual framework, and that is problematic. Then, what is the difference between a research design and a research approach? Kyazze, what is the difference between a research design and a research approach? And what do you have in your book?
In my book, thank you, Doctor. In my book, the research design is a mixed research design, and the method I am using is the exploratory sequential mixed research method.
Repeat the design.
Exploratory sequential.
I think you need to read on research approaches and research design and improve your book. There is something problematic there, and one of them is lacking.
Okay, thank you, Doctor.
You carried out regression, not so?
Yes, Doctor.
But I'm surprised that I did not see results on the DV. What did you regress? Even your questionnaire does not have question items on the dependent variable. Where did you get the data that you regressed? Because you see, you are regressing two things, independent and dependent. You only have data on the independent. Where did you get the data that helped you to carry out the regression analysis? I hope this is not forgery data.
No, it's not, Doctor.
Now, where is data for the DV? Point to the page in your book.
Sorry?
Point to a page in your book where you have data on the DV. If it is not there, you can leave it. Now it means
I had a questionnaire on
just point on the data where the data on the DV is in the book.
It is in the
page. I have the book here. Tell me the page. I will open it and see it.
For example,
open, tell me the page, I go there.
On page 78.
Page 78. Father's parenting practices. But this is the IV, not the DV. Because you are saying talk about the child's emotion. Talk about the child's acknowledgement. I need to see socio-economic development. Is it social what? That psychosocial development of the children. I want to see the data on that.
Then I had another one on page.
But this is your book. You have been with it for some time. Not so.
There's one on page 97.
Page 97. Page 97 is parenting practices. Engaging with child in classroom interacting. You don't have, let us confess, you don't have data on the DV. And therefore, this work cannot stand the statistics. You can only do descriptive and remain qualitative and remove the regression, because you cannot regress what you did not have. That is right. Then another thing, you made a statement which made me wonder, what does a scatter graph do in research? In statistics, what is the purpose of a scatter graph?
The scatter graph, thank you very much, Doctor. The scatter graph is purposely to look at the two variables to find out if...
I think you need to be helped on understanding your statistics. The purpose of a scatter graph is to show the normality of data, the linearity of the data, not to test relationships. Just to show, is this data linear, and does it qualify for correlation and regression? So you need some more reading on the statistics in order to use those statistics properly. And you also, as you are presenting the background, I was listening carefully, as if the study was not necessary, because you had already preempted everything in the background by showing that these studies had been carried out. Maybe you did not bring out the gap properly. And when you mentioned the literature, you made a sweeping statement that studies have not been done. And I immediately went to Google, and I saw several studies, Herbert and Harvey, they have done similar study. I think you need to strengthen your gap and stop giving sweeping statements which do not qualify. Studies have been done, and the only thing is that you have not seen them. So you can get them and improve your literature. And then your literature is theoretical, not empirical. For instance, literature for objective 2, the whole of it is theoretical. You did not review studies. You read notes. And the study can be backed up by evidence and not by theoretical literature. You have a wonderful theory, a good theory, but it is useless in this study. It even gives the dimensions which would have been your objectives. Now, what is this theory doing in this study? You are just, you are bringing attachment to you are attached to the study that you are putting feelings when you're explaining the theory. And we see it. It is useless because it does not show how it informed your conceptual framework and your objectives. You tried to explain, but I did not get anything. How did this theory help your study? I'm finishing because there is no time, but I felt these were pertinent issues.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Doctor.
Okay, fine. Then, why did you raise one research question? Yet this study seems to be largely qualitative. Or I did not see properly. Why did you raise one research question in a study which seems to be largely qualitative?
I wanted to have a deeper understanding, to understand.
But at this level, when you come for this forum, I should have already understood. I rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Kyazze, for again taking us through that, the statistical issues in data management, right from objectives, because you don't pick it along the way. Things must flow from the beginning. Thank you very, very, very much for raising those very pertinent issues that need to be addressed. Understanding what you want to do and how you want to do it, understanding your data is what he was bringing to your attention, Deborah.
Yes, madam.
Yeah, so we'll move, since the mic is on that side, we'll let that side take us through, and then we come back. So Dr. Disan Kutesa, one or two critical issues that have not yet been addressed. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dean. Rebecca, my name is Disan Kutesa.
Yes, Doctor.
I teach philosophy.
Yes,
And my concern is on philosophical orientation. Rebecca used constructivism for qualitative phase, and then positivism for quantitative phase. What is constructivism? And how is it related to parenting styles? Again, Rebecca, 5.3, contribution to knowledge. This is my area, epistemology. When I look at the topic, fathers' parenting practices, then I look at the objectives, findings and discussion, and your conclusion. I don't see knowledge generated. We can look at that slide, contribution to knowledge. Contribution to knowledge.
I want the full slide.
Yeah, members, this is a PhD. To me, I don't see any PhD here. I don't see knowledge generated. I'm seeing any clear suggestion. The study has found out parenting practices that the fathers engage in promoting the children's psychosocial development, contrary to the idea that the fathers are always busy. If this PhD work, where is the PhD here? Because at the end of the day, we want to see knowledge being generated. So I want Rebecca to explain how the work makes a PhD. Rebecca, on page 2, your page 2, you quoted Michael 2010. Yeah, page 2 in the book. You quoted Michael 2010 and Catherine 2016 that they did research on this very topic. So can you explain why you did research on the very topic Michael researched on? Check page 2. I saw Catherine 2016 and Michael 2010. They did research on this. Again, Rebecca, in philosophy, we are interested in clarity, in consistency and coherence. Page 16, you quoted a Jew 2013. Then page 45, you quoted Godfrey 2013. Is this a new referencing style that you change names, a Jew and then Godfrey? Lastly, Chair, Objective 1, identify parenting practices. To me, at PhD, you can't go to the field just to make identification. Your Objective 1. So I think we can revisit that objective and we change maybe to examine parenting practices. It is lowly stated. Chair, I submit.
Thank you very much for those critical areas. We have the low order and higher order statements of objectives at PhD. The difference between the two, he brings it out very clearly. I don't know, Kyazze, if you want to make any comments on that, or you have taken notes?
Taken notes.
Okay, so you look at that again. Yeah, our last on the panel here, but not least, is Sister Dr. Kawa. I'll give you this mic just to highlight those areas we have not yet touched. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would like to thank Rebecca, who has brought us here together Rebecca, we are all learning. You are not only in the class alone. We are all in the class learning. I would like to thank the supervisors who have directed this dissertation. Thank you very much. But as academicians, we are always improving.
Yes.
Supervisors who are here, we're also improving as well.
Yes.
So just take it easy. We want you to do a good job.
Thank you, sister.
Okay. Having said that, Rebecca, I want to start on a very simple note. That is your topic. Go back to your topic, please. As you're explaining about your topic, you are talking about the mothers, that you got a sample of the mothers. But when I read your topic, it was about fathers' parenting practices and their children's psychosocial development. And as we are talking about the mothers, I was wondering, from which perspective? Was it a cooperative analysis variable, or was it a controlling variable? I don't know how you included the mothers here, right from the beginning. I'm talking of the topic. I don't know what, would you like to answer, or just go ahead?
Sister, you can go ahead.
Okay. So please, you have to reconcile your topic with the explanation in your book. Two, you wrote, the role of the fathers in their children's lives varies with the time and culture. Rebecca,
Yes, Doctor.
what did you find unique and new with the time and culture about the fathers of the Kalangala sub-county in the life of their children? Just one unique aspect.
Thank you, Doctor. One unique aspect is they are using the clan names. They are naming their children clan names, and they encourage the children to be using those clan names, to use another name, because the names have an attachment and they carry message.
And how do you interpret that in your research? It's okay, they are naming clan names, but how is it connected with your research?
It's connected in terms of enriching the attachment and the bonding, and at the same time promoting the psychosocial development for the child to feel owned and will feel secure. Because
what you are telling me, a minute, Rebecca, what you are telling me, did you research that? Your explanation you have just given me, did you find it in the field, or you're just getting it from the
no, I found it in the field.
Oh, okay. Number 3, on page 6, you wrote that society is changing the role of the fathers' parenting practices. I had wanted you to share with us one unique aspect you found in your research, which shows that society is changing the role of the fathers' parenting practices in the lives of the children.
Thank you, sister. One of the examples is fathers are trying to engage the children in play by encouraging them to be playing with their peers.
Did you research that?
Yes, sister. They encourage them so much that
Can you give your empirical evidence on that, please?
Sorry?
Can you have empirical evidence on that explanation? Okay, don't worry about it. Number 3, on page 3 of your book, you wrote, men may want to be more involved in raising children and doing housework, but there is usually a lot of resistance and stigma, especially for women they want to help. So, Rebecca,
yes,
did you find in the field that women are a stumbling block for fathers' parenting practices in life of their children?
No, I didn't find that, because what I was looking for from the mothers, I wanted to find out if what the fathers are really
But did you find that surely these mothers were stumbling blockers for these fathers?
They are not stumbling blocks. I will correct it, sister.
So kindly correct those swift statements
I'll
because
correct
it means a
sister.
lot.
Yeah, thank you, sister.
I want to go to your book and I want to talk about your findings. That is about your objectives. The objective 1, this study found that fathers' parenting practices are actually doing a lot of support the children's social development. I don't want to finish it all. And in your conclusion, it was established that fathers promote their children's social development. What does this mean? That is among your conclusion. In other words, what is empirical evidence? Number 2, how do you measure actually doing a lot? Objective 2, there was evidence that fathers contribute to their children's emotional development, which was 38.8%, remaining 62.2%, which require to be bridged. What do you mean? What did you mean when you said 37.8%? According to your research, what does that mean to you?
Okay, what I meant is that what the fathers...
Let me ask you again. Let me change it. You have this percentage here, which is 37.8%. On objective 2, which was to explore the influence of fathers' parenting practices. So what does this 37.8 mean? Because I'm asking you, Rebecca, these figures, these numbers without explanation does not mean anything. And remember, you are writing for everyone to read and understand.
I shall improve.
That is 1. 2, was this about only the men in Kalangalo?
It was for fathers who have...
What type of fathers?
Fathers who have children who are in school at the age of 3 to 5 years.
I go back at what Dr. Kasula has said. Were all these fathers literate?
They were able to read and write.
All of them?
Yes, using the...
What about the fathers who were atheists, who did not have any religion at all, spirituality? They did not understand whatever spiritual means. Did you get the percentage of those fathers?
No, because my study was specifically looking at those various aspects. I would instead recommend to have recommend it to be another research area to look into that area of the supporting the children's spiritual.
Last but not least, this is information. At first you said that the children of 3 years are allowed to entertain the guests, but this is child abuse. I submit, Chair.
Okay, everything in research has to be backed by literature. So you need to get your literature to back every statement that you are advancing in your book.
Yes, Doctor.
Yes, Sister raises critical issues. If in one objective you're saying fathers' parental practices contributes 38.2, and the other 61.8 is contributed by other factors, would you then hold that hypothesis that actually fathers do contribute? If you have not known which other factor contributes either as much or more than what you are advancing. So issues of the result, take note. But I just wanted to ask Rebecca, following on what Dr. Kasule asked, what would you have done differently? And I want to give you a scenario. If I went to these schools, the nursery schools or those ECD centers you went to, and first took time to observe the behaviors of those children. And I mapped those behaviors along the psychosocial dimensions. And then followed the fathers of those children to understand their practices, which I could now correlate with the behaviors of children that I have already observed. Would it still bring out the same thing that you wanted to study?
To me, it wouldn't bring out, because to time some of these aspects would be a challenge, and somewhere, somehow, by the time you try to get to that very aspect you are looking for, maybe according to time and whatever, you find it gone and it won't work out well.
Okay. Yes, I say this following what Dr. Mujuzi had said. Probably it would have been a different type of study. Supposing we are not worried of time, supposing you are worried of the processes. So would it still be quantitative or qualitative? Okay, that is food for thought. Thank you very much, my panel of examiners, for Rebecca's presentation. I now would like to invite one or two questions from the public, and get ready for me the comments from online so that we can just read them through and see whether they've been handled or not. Yes? Sorry? She said she has taken note of what you raised. I think she will think through them with the supervisors. Don't you worry. Thank you. Who would like to ask from the public? Yes, comment from Dr. Wino, and then we shall have a question from the Dean, Graduate School, and that will end the session from the floor.
Kyazze, thank you for the presentation.
Yes, Doctor.
And of course, they have raised something. Of course, first of all, if you do longitudinal study, because this one has been cross-sectional, definitely it will give you a different answer. Yeah, at PhD level, what shows that your PhD material is the conclusion. You have the facts, you have the evidence, but at the conclusion level, you just put in active verb, then you'll be there and no one will complain. Secondly, I would like you, so that if you wanted to address the issues my brother Dison was raising, if you have stated the implication of the study from the theoretical perspective, from managerial perspective, you'd have really answered Dison's question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Win.
Graduate School.
Thank you very much, Deborah, for the work you have done.
Thank you.
But starting from where Dr. Kasule maybe stopped, or he did not answer, it is where the graduate school is concerned. The output, you can't tell us this is what is appearing here is the output. And if I had invited the press, they would be asking you, what is the output of this study? We are not seeing it apart from these generalizations. That's one. Two, I also take from what Dean, the chair, has raised. If you did not take the approach which he had said, if you did not observe these people before you made a follow-up, then we go back to Dr. Mujizi's question. What did you put in as variables of the dependent variable? In other words, how did you score them so that you are able to correlate. Then in your conceptual framework, we know it is a social study, but you had intervening variables and you indicated that they influence. How did you minimize the influence of these intervening variables? And I go back to sister's question. You are analyzing, you oversimplified the issue of a parent of being a single unit without variability. These are people with different religious affiliations, the economic background, and all these influence the psychosocial, and you ignored them. How do we now take the strength of this study and all those simplifications? Yet it is a PhD. I submit.
Thank you, Doctor.
Yes, do we have any comments from online? I'll give you 1 or 2 minutes just to say your last words regarding the issues that the Dean has raised. If you have any, if you've taken note, you'll also tell us. Any online comments? Okay. You'll have to read through. Read that.
Okay, you have two comments online. One is from Scholastica at Guriera. Says, thank you, Deborah. I like the study because it addresses a crucial area. Kindly address the issues raised and finish your journey. And then somebody called Kyazze Harriet says, thank you, Rebecca, but I think the issue of what new knowledge is critical. So those are the two so far.
Okay, so Rebecca, do you want to respond to anything? Just to clarify, do you want to clarify anything? Okay, not clarifying,
but I'm
that's
taking
okay.
note.
You've taken note, okay, thank you very much. So you've taken note, but most critical, what distinguishes a PhD research from undergraduate, from masters? That question came up so often. What is the doctorate-ness in your work? Okay, so members, I want to thank you so much for this first part of this interaction. We are now going into recess, a little recess, about 10 or so minutes. Our examiners will go and have our tea. This is the package that the Dean Graduate School has prepared us for the ED. We thank you. Yeah, so the examiners will first serve, and then the members of the public will serve. And when the public serves, please take the back chairs, because the examiners are going to discuss the issues and come up with a conclusion of Kyazze's work. So, Rebecca, we thank you very much for withstanding the heat of this first session. And we hope that you'll be able to return so that we finalize on this journey that somebody online has said. Okay?